Hi, welcome to the Gemara on Yud Aleph Amud Bet. We're starting 17 lines down at the two dots, and this is a homework video for those who were not in group number 1. Starting from the words Bayamim Hahem Keshevet HaMelech, this is from Megillat Esther. Bayamim Hahem Keshevet HaMelech literally means in those days as the king was sitting on his throne. Uktiv Batre, and it's written after that, Bishnat Shalosh L'Malcho. The next pasuk says it was in the 3rd year of his reign. So the Gemara wants to know, which is it? Were these events happening right away when he became king, or were they happening in the 3rd year of his reign? Amar Rava. Rava proposes a solution. My Keshevet. What does this word Keshevet mean? It doesn't mean when he sat on his throne. It means La'achar shenitiyashva da'ato, after his mind was calmed. And Rashi explains that what this means is that he was concerned because he believed that he was about to lose control over the Jews. He believed that the 70 years would soon be up. There was an idea that there was a prophecy that 70 years after the Galut, the Jews would be redeemed and would rebuild the temple. And so Achashverosh is very worried. Any moment now the Jews are going to break free of my rule. But Keshevet means at a certain point in his rule and his kingship, he became relaxed and no longer thought that that was going to be an issue. Amar, here's what Achashverosh said to himself. Belshazzar chashav v'ta'a. Belshazzar calculated and made a mistake. Ana chashivna v'lo ta'ina. I'm going to do calculations and I'm not going to make a mistake. Maihi. What is it? Meaning, what are these calculations? Dichtiv, as it says in Yirmiyahu, ki lefim la'ot lebavel shivim shana efkodetchem. This is the prophecy that I referenced, that once 70 years have been filled for Bavel, I will remember you. God speaking to the Jewish people. Uktiv, and it also says in Daniel, Limlot lecharvot Yerushalayim shivim shana, when 70 years have been filled from the destruction of Jerusalem. Chashov, so he thought about it this way, meaning Belshazzar thought about it this way. Belshazzar, who was a previous Babylonian king. Arba'in v'chamesh to Nebuchadnezzar, 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Ve'esrim v'tzlat Avil Merodach, and 23 years of Avil Merodach's reign. V'tarte didei, and 2 years of his, meaning 2 years of Belshazzar's. Hashivim. That makes 70. So he added up the reigns of the Babylonian kings that he knew about, including his own. He said, we've reached 70. The time is up. Afik mani de be'mikdasha ve'ishtemesh bahu. So he took out, afik is to take out or remove, mane, the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash, and he used them. Because he assumed that 70 years were up and that there would be no further redemption for the Jews, he assumed that the prophecy was false. Unevuchatnetzar minalan zarba'im ve'chamesh shanin malach. How did we know, or how did Belshazzar know that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years? The Amarmar, because the master said, this is a quote from elsewhere in the Gemara, Galu b'sheva, Galu b'shmona, Galu b'shmona asre, Galu b'cha asre. They were exiled in the 7th, they were exiled in the 8th, they were exiled in the 18th, and they were exiled in the 19th. So multiple years of Galut. And the Gemara is going to explain all of these to us. Galu b'sheva lekibush l'hoyakim. They were exiled 7 years after. Maybe I won't put the comma there. They were exiled 7 years after the conquering of Yehoiakim, who was the king of Jerusalem at that time. Galut Yehoiachin. That's Galut Yehoiachin. It's called Galut Yehoiachin because Galut Yehoiachin was the king who was sent into exile. Shehi Shmona Nebuchadnezzar, which is 8 years into the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar was in the 8th year of his reign, but 1 year after Nebuchadnezzar started reigning, that's when he conquered Jerusalem. So it's 8 years after Nebuchadnezzar took over, but 7 years after Kibush Yehoiakim. That's when the first Galut happens. Galut b'shmona asra lekibush Yehoiakim. Galut Tzidkiyahu, Shicha Israel and Nebuchadnezzar. So they were also exiled. There was a final exile or a second exile 18 years after the conquering of Jehoiakim, the conquering of Jerusalem. That's called Galut Tzidkiyahu, and that's 19 years after Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So you can have two different counts depending on whether you start from Nebuchadnezzar's reign or whether you start from the conquering of Jerusalem, which was a year later. De'amar Mar, because again we have a quote from elsewhere. The master said, Shana Rishona Kibesh Ninveh, Shnia Kibesh Yehoiakim. In the first year of his reign, meaning Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he conquered Nineveh, and in the second year of his reign, he conquered Jehoiakim. So we always have year 1 being Nebuchadnezzar starts to reign, and year 2 being the year that he conquered over the Jews. Uchtiv, and it says in Yirmiyahu, Vayhi b'shoshim v'sheva shana l'galut Jehoiachin, melech Yehuda b'shneim asar chodesh b'esrim v'chamisha l'chodesh, na'asa Avil Merodach melech Bavel b'shnat malchuto, Et Rosh Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda v'yotzeh oto mibeit hakela. So a quote from Yirmiyahu that in the 37th year after that first galut of Yehoiachin, in the 12th month, so on this date, Avil Merodach sort of pardoned Jehoiachin, let him out of jail. So we know then that he started to reign 37 years after that galut. Tamne v'tlatin v'sheva, so 8 and 37, hare arba'in v'chamesh, so that makes 45. De Nebuchadnezzar, that makes 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, we have 8 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign before the exile, and then 37 years that Jehoiachin was in prison, and that was also during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And then it seems that this pasuk says Bishnat Malchuto, as soon as Avil Merodach became king, is the implication he let this guy out of prison. So the implication being that that's 37 years after he went to prison. 37 plus 8 is 45. So Nebuchadnezzar reigned 45 years total. So that's how you get, right? 37 plus 8 gives you 45. Ve'esrin v'tzlat Avil Merodach, Gemara. And we know just from tradition, that's what this word Gemara means, just from learned tradition, that Avil Merodach reigned 23. So we have 45 plus 23. B'tarte didei, and 2 years of his, meaning 2 years of Belshazzar, Hashivin. So that's how Belshazzar got to 70. Amar, so he said, Hashda vadai tu lo mifrageh. Now for sure they will no longer be redeemed. Afik mani de be'mikdash v'ishtamesh behu. So he took out the kelim of the be'mikdash and used them. Hainu tzaka amar le Daniel. So this is that which Daniel said. Ve'al mari shemaya hitramamte ulamane de bete hitu kadamach. So basically, just a quote from Daniel saying, you've sort of raised yourself up over the master in heaven, and you've taken out before you the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. Uktiv, and another reference, Bebelela Ktil Belshazzar Malka Kazdai. So right away, the next thing that happens, or soon after, let's say, Belshazzar is killed that night. Uktiv v'Yavish Mida Kibel Malchuta Kfar Shanin Shitin v'Tartin. So Belshazzar the king, so Belshazzar was killed, and Daryavish gets conquered afterwards. And these are all those psukim in Daniel that kind of track that first he sinned against God, he took the kelim, then Belshazzar gets killed, again, according to the Gemara, as a direct result of him having used the kelim with the Beit HaMikdash. And then Daryavish is 32 when he takes over the kingdom. Amar. So this is Achashverosh speaking again. Achashverosh said, "Ihu mita'atai." He made a mistake. Ana chashivne v'lo teina. But I'm going to calculate it and not make a mistake. Miktiv l'malchut Bavel. Does it say Ha'im? Right? Does it really say l'malchut Bavel that we're counting from the kingship of Bavel? L'Bavel ktiv. It just says L'Bavel, right? Just after Babylonia, not specifically after the kingship of of Babylonia begins. Mila Bavel. So what does that word Bavel mean? Legalut Bavel. Means we're supposed to be counting from the Galut and not from the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Kama Batziran. So how many Batzir is like less or take away. So how many are we missing basically? Right? How many years did Belshazzar not account for? Tamne. So the answer is 8. There were 8 years unaccounted for because again, the Galut started 8 years into Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Chashi va'ayel chilufayhu. So Achashverosh calculated, and Ayel Chilufayhu literally put up in their place. Right? He came up with the following numbers. Chana de Belshazzar, another year of Belshazzar's, because he was 3 years into his reign when he was killed. So another year of Belshazzar's, v'chamesh Daryavish v'Koresh, and 5 years combined of Daryavish and Koresh, who followed Belshazzar. V'tar Tedidei, and 2 years of his own, of Achashverosh's, right? Because the action takes place in the 3rd year, so he's already reigned for 2 years. Ha-shivin, so now he's got 70. Kevan dechazi demalu shivin v'lo ifruk, but when he saw that 70 years had gone by, he thinks, well, now for sure it's been 70 years. I calculated correctly. V'lo ifruk, and they haven't been released, they haven't been redeemed. Amar, so Achashverosh says to himself, Hashta vadai tulam mifrakei. Now they will certainly no longer be redeemed. Afig mani de Mikdash v'ishtamesh behu. So he took out the kelim of the Beit Hamikdash and used them. Basatan, the Satan, the devil, for lack of a better term, came. V'riked beinehen, and danced in between them. The haraget Vashti, and killed Vashti. The hashapir chashiv. Now the Gemara is like, okay, that story's fine, but actually, weren't his calculations good? Right? Shapir is good or well. Weren't his calculations good? Ihu nami mitaitai. No, he also made mistakes or made a mistake. Because it was required of him, he should have counted from the charvot of Yerushalayim, from the destruction of Jerusalem, which would be in year 18/19, not in year 7/8, right? Later in Nebuchadnezzar's reign, when the second Galut happens and Jerusalem's completely destroyed, and now everyone's been exiled. Sof kama b'tziran. Sof, so in the end, how many are we missing? This Chadesar is taken out but gets put back in, maybe in a different form. So we're missing 11 years, right? Because again, he counted from year 7 or 8 instead of year 18 or 19. Ihu kama malach. So how many years did he reign? Meaning Achashverosh. Arbesar. He reigned 14 years. And Rashi explains that we know this because in the 12th year of Achashverosh's reign, Hipil Pur Hagarel, that's when they cast lots, when Haman has his whole shtick. And the following year was when the miracle happened, so that's the 13th year of his reign. And we know that he was king the next year too, because the Megillah makes reference to Shana Acheret, but Shana Acheret, and the next year they also celebrated Purim, and the Gemara seems to assume that means that he was still the king at that time. So he reigned at least 14 years, and the Gemara assumes no longer. It's just interesting because when you think about it that way, the Megillah actually stretches over a long time, whereas the story seems sort of condensed and short. Actually, we start with the 3rd year of his reign, and we go through basically all 14 years of his reign. So that's just interesting to note that Rashi explains it that way. So anyway, 14 years of his reign. So in the 14th year of his reign, which is 11 years after the 3rd year of his reign, they should have been building the Beit HaMikdash. Right? If you're telling me that 11 was the magic number to add to get the real 70, then at the end of his reign, they should have built the Beit HaMikdash. But that's not what happened, so we need to explain that. Alama Ktiv, so why does it say, Badin B'Teilat Avedat Beit El-Hadi B'Yerushalayim? This is another pasuk from Daniel. Again, whenever you see psukim that are in Aramaic, you should assume that they come from Sefer Daniel. So they stopped working on the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and it stopped in the 2nd year of the reign of Daryavish, the king of Persia. Basically, it did not happen. Right? It did not happen in the time of Achashverosh. Amar Rava. So Rava explains, Shani Makuta Odhavu. These were cut off years, meaning they were not complete years. or many of the years were not full years, right? Some of the 70 years weren't complete years. For example, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a Braita that supports this. Ve'od shana acheret leBavel, ve'amad Daryavish v'hishlima. An example of speaking about the transition from to Daryavish, from Belshazzar to Daryavish. Daryavish completed Belshazzar's year. Shana acheret leBavel, ve'amad Daryavish v'hishlima. He completed his year. So again, the idea is sometimes when you talk about a king reigning 3 years, you really mean 2 years and then into the third year, 2 years and 2 months. So that's how you get this count being off, and so it's really hard to count the right number of years. Amar Rava, and Rava goes on to say, Af Daniel ta'a b'hai chushbana. Daniel also messed up the count. It's not, you don't have to be non-Jewish or a king to mess up the count. Dichtiv, as it says in Daniel. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, sort of looked carefully, examined the books. And the Gemara says from the fact that it says binoti, or Rava saying binoti, the special word for kind of examining or looking in the books, that implies that he made a mistake, that he had thought about a time for the redemption and then realized he was wrong, so he had to re-examine. Okay, so that finishes up the discussion about why it's so hard to count correctly. We never really get a great satisfactory answer about how the counting should have worked out. Mikol makom kashu kraya hazade. Mikol makom, nonetheless, these two psukim are difficult with one another, or they conflict with one another, with each other. That's what hazade means, with each other. Here are the two psukim that we had earlier. K'tiv, Ma'otza Bavel, it says when the time is up for Bavel, and we've seen already different interpretations of what that should mean. Uktiv, and it says in Dinia Lecharvot Yerushalayim. And so that legitimately makes it hard to count when you can't figure out what you're counting from. Amar Rava, Lipkeda Ba'alma. So Rava says, well, this is just for kind of general remembrance, right? Leaf code, to be remembered, although it usually has a redemptive or positive aspect, doesn't necessarily mean full redemption. It's just a God remembering them, and that does in fact happen in Ezra. In Sefer Ezra, V'hainu tichtiv, this is what it says in Ezra. Ko amar Koresh melech Paras, kol mamachot haaretz natan li Hashem Elokei Hashemayim, v'hu pakad alai livnot bayit b'Yerushalayim. So there you have a shout out, right? Koresh says, God gave me all of the kingdoms, and he's instructed me to build a house in Jerusalem. So that's true. Koresh does say, oh yes, I should build a house in Jerusalem, etc. It's not full Geulah. It doesn't actually happen then, but there is a remembrance, so that prophecy is fulfilled. It's just that wasn't a prophecy of full Geulah. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda explains, my dichtiv, what is the meaning of this pasuk that is written? Ko amar Hashem leMashicho leKoresh, asher hichzakti bimino. This is what God said to his Mashiach, to Koresh, whose right hand he strengthened. So that's what the pasuk says. V'chi Koresh Mashiach haya, was Koresh Mashiach? That's how he's referred to in the pasuk. Ella, rather, Amar le Hakadosh Baruch Hu leMashiach. Rather, God said to Mashiach, up there in heaven with him, Kubal ani lecha al Koresh. I'm complaining to you about Koresh. Ani amarti hu yivne beiti v'kabetz galuyotai v'hu amar mi bachem mikol amovayal. I said, he's going to build my house and gather my exiles. And he said, and this is a quote from Ezra, who among you wants to go up? Meaning, Koresh was supposed to galvanize the people and gather people and build the house, and all he said was, oh, anyone who wants to go back can go back. It's not so exciting. I have questions down here for you at the bottom. What do Belshazzar and Achashverosh each do when they think the 70 years are up, and why? What was Belshazzar's counting error? What was Achashverosh's counting error? What makes counting the 70 years so difficult? And then a question about rewriting the narrative of Megillat Esther based on Masechet Megillah. That's it. We'll stop here.